Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's VECAN webinar, Reducing Food Waste as a Climate Solution. We're very happy to have all of you joining us for this ongoing webinar series. My name is Ian Hitchcock. I'm an organizer with the Vermont Natural Resources Council and help to coordinate the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, made up of town energy committees from all across Vermont. And we were really excited to be partnering with our friends from the Agency of Natural Resources and the Chittenden Solid Waste District today to start talking about how reducing food waste can be a climate solution for Vermonters, in addition to some of the more traditional things we work on in the energy world. I wanted to start by walking through a brief infographic that was shared by our friends at A&R that talks about some of the benefits of keeping food waste out of a landfill. For one, this food waste helps feed people. Rescued food donations have almost tripled from 2014 to 2017 to the Vermont Food Bank. Reducing food waste also helps reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, support green jobs, can help restore compost, and reduce the need for landfills. Every year, Vermont landfills get around 77,000 tons of food scraps each year. And if those were to be composted instead of throwing them in the trash, it's estimated that that would reduce Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions as much as not driving around 115 million miles, which is equivalent to driving around the Earth roughly 4,600 times. So clearly, a lot of opportunity to see some real carbon savings by working to reduce food waste. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I would encourage all attendees to submit questions as they have them as the presentation's going forward using the chat bar in your GoToWebinar control panel. I'm typing a message now so that everyone should see where that chat bar is. So you can see where that message came is where your questions will be. And toward the end of the presentations, I'll help moderate a discussion with our panelists to go over any of the questions that you all have as we go through this presentation. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. First off, we have Josh Kelly and Ann Bajar, who work as a team with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources to implement Vermont's recycling, composting, product stewardship, and waste reduction initiatives. Previously, Josh worked for the Institute for Sustainable Communities, the Highfield Center for Composting, and the Trust for Public Land, while Ann has worked for Shelburne Farms and All Earth Renewables and was a member of Charlotte's Energy Committee for several years. We'll also be joined later on this hour by Robin Orr, and as the event outreach coordinator for the Chittenden Solid Waste District, Robin helps events of all sizes reduce their waste and effectively manage what can't be avoided. She's a lifelong recycling and composting geek who turned pro in 2015, much to the relief of her family and friends. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Josh and Ann. Josh and Ann, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ian. We're really excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll get our presentation started. We're very excited to be talking to the VECAN audience. I did attend a workshop, I think it was in 2014, maybe 2013, with the VECAN conference, and just such energy and enthusiasm from all of you. So thanks so much for listening to us on this lunch hour. We're going to be talking about food waste as a climate solution. When preventing it in its multiple ways. Ann and I both work with the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation in the solid waste program. And just to start, what you're looking at with these symbols on the screen are pretty common symbols you're probably used to in terms of the recycling symbol. And then in 2013, when Vermont introduced the Universal Recycling Law, we came up with a symbol that we hope becomes synonymous with both food donation, food rescue, and food scrap separation in all its forms. So whether it's being fed to animals or for composting, or also anaerobic digestion. So the apple core is to represent sort of the the higher uses you can use food waste and food scraps for, and then the purple apple, the whole one, is for getting quality food to people who can use it. So let's go right on in, and we'll talk about, I guess, this issue in some depth. So here's an outline for today's webinar. We want to discuss the problem, look at how much food is being wasted, look at why it matters, especially to make that climate connection, and why waste happens. We'll talk about some strategies that you can use to reduce wasted food, and also talk about places and ways you can engage your community and take action. We're going to try and get through it quick so we give you some time for Q&A, and we're just so thrilled to be chatting with you. So this is a slide from, I believe it's the World Resource Institute, and some research that was done that basically says that if food waste were a country, if you compare it to countries in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it's basically the third largest. It would be the third largest country in terms of greenhouse gas emitter. So it's a huge producer of both methane and carbon dioxide in terms of both food loss, that's lost food, in terms of resources, water and energy used to grow food, that's food loss on farms, and also food waste, right down to food waste in landfills. It's estimated that up to 40% of food is never eaten in the United States, and it's a problem that we've seen, I guess, here in Vermont as well. And there's a study by the REFED report, which was done with some support from the Natural Resource Defense Council, looking into what can be done to prevent food waste. Sorry, I lost control of my slides here for a sec. There we go. Okay, we're back. So I mentioned that REFED report, which is really interesting data on food waste and food loss. This slide is showing you the impact that loss has, essentially where the waste is happening. And the two circles at the bottom show you that, it really show you the financial impact of this food loss and waste. And it shows that primarily businesses and homes are where most of the waste is occurring. Some of this is on farms, and some of it is in manufacturing of food products, but it's the consumer really where the waste is happening. Whether you're at a restaurant, you don't finish your meal, or what that restaurant is doing with food that is spoiled, or food that they did not serve. And we're here to look at higher and better uses for that. So let's put this in a Vermont context. About every 5 years, Vermont has a contractor that looks through our waste stream. And that's a messy job. They're literally picking through Vermonters' trash, sorting out what's in it. And they call that the waste composition study. We had one done in 2018, which was very recent, and it consistently shows that food waste and organic materials like leaf and yard debris are a significant portion of the waste stream. Ian already mentioned it's about 77,000 tons per year that are in the trash and disposed of annually. Of that organics pie that's in red and circled, food waste and food scraps and edible food is the most significant portion of all these materials by weight. Special waste, people often ask us, what is that? That is everything from mattresses, couches, and bulky waste to rubber, textiles, and a whole host of sort of unique wastes. But by material type, food waste is the largest portion of Vermont's waste stream. And a family of four spends nearly $1,500 a year on food they don't eat. And the average American wastes about 4.5 pounds of food per day. Of trash per day, which is about 1 pound of food waste per person per day.
Yeah.
All right, and then back to the Vermont context. The state has had a goal of reducing our waste and increasing recycling and composting, what we call diversion, For several years, actually almost several decades, we've had a goal of 50%, a 50% recycling and composting rate. So of all the materials we no longer have a use for, our goal is to have 50% of that be recycled or composted, and 50% go to disposal. It's been an elusive goal, and the ban that comes up in July 1, 2020 on food scraps is meant to help drive us toward that 50% goal. So there are other states that have food scrap bans of different types. California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont have these laws. And as I mentioned, in 2020, all food scraps in Vermont are banned, but there are some exceptions, because I want people to understand that this is not a switch that is flipped resulting in 100% of food waste, being kept out of the trash. That's not even the state's expectation. By all estimates, if we achieve 60% separation of food waste and food from the trash, that is success. That's the best estimate we have of this law, and that is the real goal, to increase the amount of food that is put to better uses. So some of the exceptions and flexibility in the law are exemptions for haulers and facilities from having to collect these materials. Residents that home compost can throw out meat and bones if they're composting at home, even after the 2020 ban. So this is to make it easy for people to compost. We know that meat and bones are a challenge for people to manage at home. So if you compost at home, you can throw those away even after 2020. If you bring them to a drop-off or use a curbside provider, you can put them in your food scrap bucket. All state composters that are certified accept meat and bones, and they can compost them effectively. Businesses and institutions that have a compost program can dispose of some de minimis amount of material. Again, it's nobody's expectation that this is going to be perfect, and we do receive requests from businesses from time to time when they have 1 ounce packages of product that they cannot depackage, and we ask them to ask us for those exceptions to be allowed for disposal. In Vermont law, the universal recycling law that passed in 2013, it did set a priority for management of food, and the first is reducing it at the source, which Ann's going to talk about quite a bit. The second is rescuing quality food for people, and the Vermont Food Bank has seen a near tripling in food donations since the law began to take effect. I credit them largely and their food shelves with that increase, and the law plays a part in it, but it's a lot of the work they've done to increase food rescue in the state. Additionally, food for animals. There's many people who feed pigs and chickens, different food scrap products, and then composting and anaerobic digestion. So you can see there's a hierarchy of higher priorities and then lesser priorities on this scale. And many of you have heard about the Drawdown book, which has over 100 climate solutions. I just wanted to note and flag that 3 of them are, and more than just 3, but 3 of them are directly correlated to this initiative. Number 3, reducing food waste. I mean, this just shows you the impact this can have from climate perspective. Number 30, methane and anaerobic digestion, which we'll talk about a little bit. And number 60 is composting. We've been over this slide already. Ian actually addressed it really well, so I won't spend too much time here, but there's other benefits as well: green jobs, restoring soil, and reducing the need for landfills. Everything we can compost or recycle is something we don't need to fill our landfills with. And now I'll turn it over to Ann.
So why does food waste even matter? Wasted food equals wasted resources. So when we're wasting food, we're wasting all the resources that went into growing, transporting, distributing, and storing that food. And as Josh talked about, it's also a waste of financial resources. $1,500 a year for the average family of 4 is a lot of money. But in terms of natural resources, even with the most sustainable practices, our food system is using an enormous amount of resources. if you think about the food cycle from seed, you know, cropland, you need water to grow the food, you need labor, you need energy to store it and transport it. If we're not ever eating that food, all those resources are used in vain. So just to look at this slide in terms of natural resources, 25% of all our freshwater use is just wasted, and also enough energy to power the country for more than a week, and enough land to feed the world's hungry. Down at the bottom, like, we wouldn't go into the shower, turn on the water, and let it run for 370 minutes after we'd taken our shower. And that's the amount of water it takes to raise a pound of beef, and 60 minutes of water for a pound of rice. So there's a lot of waste that's happening, and it's sad. So why does waste happen? If you think in your own home, what's going on that's creating waste, look at that first picture. We don't necessarily have the skills to cook food in the way we want. So somebody burned a whole batch of rolls. And then in the middle picture, we often buy way too much food and stuff our fridge, so we can't even see what's in the back as things are molding and getting old. And then the picture on the right, it's overproducing, overconsumption. You know, everybody wants to be a good host and have enough food for a crowd. So we produce way too much, and then we don't have a plan for what to do with the leftovers. There's often confusion about date labels, and so people throw things out when they're really still totally fine to eat, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then I don't know about you guys, but I have kids, and I want to feed them healthy food, so I try different recipes, and sometimes they just don't like them. So if you have picky kids, that's also a reason that waste happens. Or if lots of people are doing the shopping, you know, you buy the dozen eggs and your partner already did that. So now you have a lot of eggs to use up. So we just have to be creative in those situations. So what can we do? How can we as citizens make a difference in this massive food waste problem? I love that the poster on the left is from World War I, and it just shows that, you know, we used to really value food a lot more than we do now. It used to be a much larger percentage of our income was spent on food than it is now, as food's gotten so cheap. So we just don't value it as much. So what can we do? I'm just going to talk about 5 different strategies. There's smart shopping. There's making good use of your leftovers. There's different ways of being creative when you cook in the kitchen, knowing how to store foods properly, and then knowing what expiration dates mean. So the first strategy is smart shopping and planning. And that really boils down to just buying what you need and eating what you buy. It means going to the store with a shopping list. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you plan out what you're going to cook every single day, but you just have a general idea. And so it leaves some flexibility also for buying local and seasonal produce. But the objective is first to shop your kitchen. So you look around your fridge, you look in your pantry, what do you already have on hand when you're making your plan? And then a couple other tips, like don't go to the grocery store hungry. Buy ingredients that can be used for lots of recipes at once, and that saves time too, because if you're cooking a whole bunch of peppers and onions, and for one meal you save them in your fridge, and then you use them throughout the week, and it saves you time. And then buying in bulk is another good strategy. You can often get, you know, pasta or oatmeal or things like that. Herbs that people already know about, but if you think about it, if you just need a few slices of meat, you can basically buy in bulk from your deli and just get exactly what you need. You don't have to buy those prepackaged portions. You want to be aware of sales when you go to the store and kind of bulk purchasing if you're a Costco shopper, because it's only a good deal if you actually eat all that food. And then when you're planning, schedule in a couple lazy nights, 1 or 2 nights when you know you've either got a kid's concert or you're going out with friends, so that you're not overbuying food that you're not going to get to that week. So basically, smart shopping is just buying the quantities you need until your next shopping trip. I like to think about it as kind of a European way of shopping, and you know, being much more deliberate when you're at the store instead of just going on autopilot and putting everything in your cart. Now, another good strategy is to just use a smaller cart. You'll buy less stuff. So I talked about this a little bit, but if you're having a big dinner party, there's a tool called the Guesstimator on savethefood.com, and that'll be on a resource list later on. But it's a really great tool. You put in how many people are coming to your party, whether they're small, medium, or big eaters, whether you want to have leftovers or not. And it lets you know how much protein to serve, how many side dishes, and other tips like that, so you're not over preparing food that may not get eaten. And then when you have guests coming, get in the habit of telling them to bring some Ziplocs or some containers, so that if you have a lot extra, they can take it home with you. Or better yet, if you like leftovers, make sure you have enough containers that you can portion them out and put them in your freezer. So that the part of the next strategy is just eating what you buy. You want to have a visual representation in your fridge. You can actually put a sign, I haven't done this yet, but I want to try it, on your fridge, and put all the foods there that are going to go bad soon, so that you just know right when you open your fridge, okay, this is what I need to eat first. And then you need to get a little creative in the kitchen with your leftovers. So there are 3 different pictures in here. That on the lower left is a panzanella salad. It's an Italian salad made with stale bread. And then in the upper left is fried rice. And then we have bread pudding. And those are great recipes where you can use things that are just left over in your fridge, so that they're not going to waste. And another thing, if you have lots of condiments on hand, maple syrup, lemon juice, barbecue sauce, those are great things to use when you're trying to use up all your leftovers, just to add a little extra flavor. Oh, and there's also some great apps that are on the resource list. So if you look in your fridge and you're like, okay, I've got, a pepper and some brown rice and mushrooms that I really need to use, you can put those in these apps and they'll pop up different recipes for you to try. So the next strategy is also related to kind of being creative in the kitchen, and not being afraid to try new things. And I like to think of this as a way to have a challenge with your housemates or spouse, like who can make the best meal out of whatever you've got in your fridge. It's kind of a fun thing to do. And in order to use up what's in your fridge, don't be afraid to, when you have something that's looking a little wilted, a lot of foods can be revived, limp vegetables, by soaking them in ice water for 10 to 15 minutes, or just stick them right in a soup or a stew. It doesn't necessarily matter what they look like. They're going to get cooked and taste delicious anyway. The chef at Shelburne Farms gave me this tip. If you ever accidentally burn a soup or a stew, right away take it out of the pot and pour it into a new pot. And then you can cover up that slightly burnt taste with spices and something sweet. And then you have a nice smoked stew. I like that one. And then don't be afraid to, ditch the peeler and get a nice vegetables scrub brush and scrub the carrots and the potatoes instead of peeling them. You're going to get a more nutrient dense meal because you're eating the skins. Let's see. And then when in doubt, use hero recipes. A hero recipe is something like a chili or a stew or a soup where you don't have a specific recipe, but you can put whatever you have in the fridge in there. Let's see. So the next part is smart storage, how to store your food. There's some foods that are better stored in a fridge, like apples, and then some that aren't, like avocados. But when an avocado gets ripe, to make it last a little bit longer, you can stick it in the fridge, and that'll buy you another couple of days. And then the refrigerator. I'm not going to go into detail about this slide, but the main thing to remember is you want the temperature of the fridge to be 40 degrees or less to help food last longer. And that's something you really should check because often they kind of creep up in temperature. And then just remember that the door is warm, so you don't want to put any fresh foods in there. And then really use your crisper drawers. The one should be high humidity, and that should be mostly for your vegetables. And then you want one that's less if you have the way to change the humidity level, less humidity for most of your vegetables that rot easily. And if you're storing your foods for maximum freshness, they're going to taste better. And another trick is if you have herbs like parsley or coriander or cilantro and asparagus too, those should be stored straight up in a larger container with some water on the bottom. And you can even take a plastic bag and kind of put it over the top and create a little microcosm there where they're staying moist. And it's amazing. They will last like weeks. I have parsley that's been in my fridge for like 2 weeks that's still good. So then last, don't be afraid to use your freezer. If you did prepare too much food, cut it up into smaller portions like a lasagna. You don't want to necessarily freeze a whole lasagna pan, but put things in smaller portions in your freezer. Don't forget to label them. And when you are storing like meats, you want to, if you're getting them from the butcher, you want to actually take them out of the package that they were in and wrap them in a plastic wrap or something to keep the air from touching the meat, and then put it in a Ziploc bag and try to get as much air out of there as possible, because that will help your foods last longer. And then don't forget to schedule a night where you're just, you don't have to cook. You're just going to cook from your freezer and use all that food up. So the last thing to know about, the last strategy, is just understanding expiration dates. And it's actually pretty simple, even though it looks crazy with all those different ways to that manufacturers have to make sure that their products are stored at kind of peak freshness. It's not a federally regulated, or expiration dates are not federally regulated except for baby food. So all of these ways of talking about freshness are really just indications for the manufacturer and for the stores for when the product is at its freshest or at peak quality. So the main thing to do is trust your eyes and your nose. So look at what it is, smell it, and if it smells good and it doesn't look bad, then it's probably great to eat. So trust yourself. But inevitably you are going to have some food scraps. So what can you do with your food scraps? It's great to get a small little kitchen counter bucket just to make it easy. So you're putting stuff into the compost instead of into the trash. And then you have options. You can compost at home in your backyard. You can bring it to a transfer station. All transfer stations across the state now accept food scraps. And I'll show you a map in a minute where those are. And then there are some areas that now have curbside collection for food scraps. And we have a list of food scrap haulers on our website, so you can check that out. So here's showing where you can bring food scraps if you don't want to compost at home. And then we wanted to make sure that you knew about the Vermont Master Composter Program if you want to learn more about how to compost. It's our partnership with UVM Extension, and the next class is starting in September. So signups will be soon. So here's a list of resources, and I can share those with Ian so he can share those with you as well. And thanks. Look forward to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh and Ann. We're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit more about how you can work to reduce food waste on the community level, working to engage with local businesses, institutions, schools, and Robin's going to have some great case studies about how we can reduce our food waste as communities. So I've just turned it over to Robin to be the presenter, and it looks like we are seeing her screen just fine. Hello, Robin, and thank you so much for being with us. Sounds like we don't have audio from Robin at the moment. Give me just a moment to see if I can make sure that she is unmuted.
There I am. Sorry about that. Not find the button. So thanks. Should I just jump right in?
Go right ahead.
All right. So I work for the Chittenden Solid Waste District up in northwestern Vermont as the event outreach coordinator, which means that I do, oops, my screen control doesn't seem to, oh, there we go. So I do outreach to events, and then I also do outreach at events, and this is our kind of secret weapon. We have two primary avenues that we use. One is the Waste Warrior program. The second one is a bin loan program, and these are ways that we connect directly with the community that then sort of play out and have expanded benefits as it ripples across the community. Our Waste Warrior program is a group of trained volunteers who go to events and stand at the sorting stations and just help people get things in the right bin. And while it certainly has a direct benefit for the event organizer in that it reduces contamination, our primary motivation in doing it is actually from the educational benefit. You know, if one person comes to an event and learns that paper cups don't belong in the recycling bin, and then you think about how many paper cups that person is going to use over their lifetime and how many people they're going to tell that paper cups can't go into the recycle bin. We like to think that every educational opportunity we have at these events just ripples. And lately, most of the events in this area have already started separating food scraps. So it's a great opportunity for us to talk with people about home composting options, drop-off composting options, and just learn more about what their obligations are. And we hope that it inspires their behavior change and that it inspires them to sort of spread the word with others. In terms of how we recruit them, we've used Front Porch Forum. We have a monthly electronic newsletter that goes out, Facebook, and a lot of it has been through word of mouth. And the key thing that we've really been able to benefit from is having really good bait. We have some great concert series that happen in the area, some of which they're really expensive tickets, and by being able to offer free admission in exchange for a few hours of volunteering, that has been a super helpful incentive. One challenge that we ran into was that it was really easy to get people to volunteer for sold out concerts, but for things that are free, like you know, town picnics or farmers markets, not so much. So we've had to work to try to come up with creative things, especially when they're town sponsored events that, you know, they don't have a budget for buying things for people, but they also can't offer free admission. So we started sort of just brainstorming about, well, what do you have that people have to pay money for that maybe you could not make them pay? And so things like parking passes, other fees people have to pay, dog licenses, you know, and anything that a town offers, sports leagues, programs like that, that they could just waive the fee. It doesn't have a direct cost to them, but it has a direct benefit to the volunteers. And one other thing that has worked for us is if you can get a bunch of donations or something that chip into sort of one larger, more valuable prize, and then each person, when they volunteer, they get, you know, one entry into the raffle for every hour they volunteer. It encourages people to sign up more and more and more in order to enhance the chances of winning, but it's only one item that you have to actually come up with. And one of our local energy committees here in Williston really took this to heart, and they started just by themselves being the volunteers at their town's annual ice cream social. And they did all the work. They borrowed bins from us through the bin loan program we'll talk about in a minute. They themselves monitored the sorting stations, and they collected the food scraps and brought them themselves over to Green Mountain Compost, so that the town let them do it, but the town didn't have to do anything to make it happen. And then fast forward a few years, and it met with such success that now the town officials have agreed they're going to collect food scraps separately at all town-sponsored public events. The Energy Committee is organizing teams of volunteers to monitor stations at all those events. And the town has taken on all the other responsibilities of arranging for containers and hauling. So it was just a little seed of 1 or 2 interested people on that committee who happened to know that we had a bin loan program, who sort of took this one first step of let's just collect the, leftover ice cream and napkins and get those composted. And now it's sort of spiraled into collecting food scraps. And we're lucky here in Chittenden County, we have a composter that accepts compostable products, including uncoated paper, like napkins and paper towels. So that helps make it appealing to event organizers to start collecting food scraps, because there's a whole bunch of other things that they can get in there as well. And one of the gaps that we spotted in the community, especially for collecting food scraps in event settings, is that people often just didn't have an appropriate container. They have their own containers that they use on their kitchen counter, or for taking out the back door. But if they're going to have a wedding reception or a graduation party or a family reunion, they couldn't handle that kind of scale. They literally didn't have anything to put it in. And so we have a bin loan program where we have a fleet of containers of different sizes. We have compost containers, recycling containers, and they just sort of fill in the gaps when there's, when people have a one-time need for a container, but it doesn't make sense. It's not something they're going to be doing over and over and over again. So owning a container doesn't make sense. And it works really well. And word spreads primarily through word of mouth and our website. But one of the big challenges is people have to come to us to pick them up. We keep all the bins here at our headquarters. They have to come here to get them. Then after the event, they have to take care of whatever materials were in it and then clean the container and then bring them back. They have to schedule appointments with us because as outreach staff, we're a lot of the time we're out reaching. So they need to schedule with us in advance, and we aren't open 24/7, particularly not on the weekends when a lot of these events take place. And so a local committee in Charlotte, Vermont, decided, this is just a complete pain. We don't want to have to drive over there all the time. So let's get some containers closer by. And so this one concerned resident got several of the town departments to chip in money, and then they were able to match. We have a container grant program that covered 50% of the costs. So they bought 3 sorting stations, and they're kept and managed by the library, which already they're experts on keeping things and people being able to borrow and return them. So it was just one extra little service they were providing, but it provides access to their whole community to bins that they can use just for any ad hoc needs that they have. And then another local energy committee thought, well, that's great, maximizing recycling and collecting compostables, but we all know it's better to prevent having to dispose of things in the first place. So they got a collection of durable cutlery and cups that people can borrow, so they don't have to even make choices about which kind of disposable item they're going to use. And then a few other examples of ways that our communities are taking on this mission upon themselves and spreading the word. We had one community member, actually it was the same one who started the bin loan program in Charlotte, who worked with the students there at it's a K-8 school, I think, to start an on-site composting project. And it's open to members of the community. It's on school property, public property, everybody chips in for it. So residents can go there to drop off home food scraps instead of having to come to one of our drop-off centers. And because, the over time, the volunteer group provides continuity to keep the pile healthy and working well. One other community member wanted to be able to compost, but lived in a condominium, couldn't do backyard composting, and was really not convenient to be able to take things, in this case herself, to a drop-off center. So she got the condo board to agree to add organics pickup to their trash contract. It started the first year, they just put out 2 compost toters to see how it worked, and everybody loved it. So that program expanded to all the dumpsters on the property. So everyone that lives there has a convenient place without having to walk a great distance where they can put their food scraps and know that they'll get composted. And other local opportunities that different groups are working with in different ways: farmers markets, sporting events, houses of worship. We had a parish green team committee all get trained as waste warriors so that they could serve as waste warriors at events in their parish hall. We've had parents who are trained as waste warriors volunteer in their school cafeterias and help. In one case, there was only one school in Chittenden County that hadn't started separating food scraps, and they had been resistant to our phenomenal outreach person who works with schools. But when this one parent who came to a waste warrior training got really motivated about this issue, went and said, you know, how come you aren't doing this? What am I supposed to tell my children about why they're supposed to throw food in the trash at school, but they can't do that at home? And so the school agreed to start, and they also got some container grants through us to help get that program going. And there are lots of other community gatherings, you know, summer band concerts, fairs, carnivals, parades. Every place that people are gathering is an opportunity both to improve the waste reduction at the event itself, but even more so to get that message out to all the people who are attending the event. If they see that you can even do it, you know, at a 10,000 person concert, then it makes it harder for them to say, well, I don't know how I can manage it in my own backyard, you know, with my family of 5. So we just try to take advantage of every place that people are gathering, and in a spirit of helpfulness and trying to improve that particular outcome, we try to leverage that opportunity to communicate the importance of these issues to everyone that attends, and we get to hit an audience that we wouldn't necessarily intersect with in some of our other more, you know, historically typical outreach activities. And we don't have any data, of course, to back up how effective it is, but just from an anecdotal perspective, it seems to be doing wonders. And the one real benefit it provides to me personally and to a lot of our waste warriors is that it can be really easy to get discouraged about climate news and environmental news and food waste news and thinking about species extinction, and you can feel like, you know, you're kind of the little boy holding your finger in the dike trying to stop this, you know, unstoppable force from overtaking us. And spending just a few hours standing at a sorting station gives me so much hope. There are so many people who really want to learn, really want to change their behavior, are so grateful to us for being there that, you know, it's really kind of a boost just to keep my own energy up. And it's been a lot of fun. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in starting any of these things to get in touch with your local solid waste district. I don't know, I'm not familiar with the resources that all of them have, but I know what we are able to offer training for volunteers. We can do free publicity on our Facebook page and website and things like that. And then our bin loan program has been super popular. And we have grant funding that can help community organizations buy containers for projects like this. And so those grants have made several of these projects possible. In fact, the the waste warrior / parent who got the last school going. I don't remember if I mentioned they did also got a container grant from us to help make that happen. Sort of takes down the barriers of, oh, it's too expensive. We sort of help whittle that away. And that's my real quick and dirty list, but happy to answer any other questions. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Robin, for sharing that experience. And it was really exciting for me to see, how some energy committees have already been involved in this work, and hopefully we provided some great ideas and inspiration for folks who were listening, how they might get involved as well. I have one quick question from your presentation. You mentioned that Williston was, apologies for the phone there. Give me just a quick moment. But you mentioned Williston was one community that had been engaged in working with waste. What was the other community, the other energy committee that had worked with loaned cutlery?
I didn't put that in on purpose because I am not positive. I actually think that may also have been Williston. They're super active, but I am not sure, and I couldn't quickly find in our little database which group it had been. I know it was a person from the Williston Energy Committee that told me about it, and I don't remember. It sounded like she was telling me about it in the third person, like someone is doing this, but I just don't remember. I'll see if I can find out.
Sounds good. We appreciate that. Got a couple questions come in here, and Josh and Ann, I hope that you've been able to unmute yourselves as well so that you can chime in here. One question is, how much of an impact is Salvation Farms having, and how could we help them achieve greater gleaning use?
Salvation Farms is doing great work, and if we can get back to, can we get back to one of our slides?
Absolutely. Let me make you guys the presenter here in just a moment.
Sharing.
So, they're working on the food loss part of the problem, not necessarily food waste. So there was a slide that showed it. I think it's about a $1 million pound. This one here. Oh no, they're 10 million. Okay, so can everybody see this now?
I believe so.
So the 10 million on the bottom is the amount of waste, 10 million tons of waste is happening, or food loss, sorry, is happening on farms. And that's exactly the portion of the problem that Salvation Farms is working on. And they're doing lots of great work, but they do have a collection of volunteers, but I know that that's one of the issues that they struggle with, is just getting more volunteers for gleaning. But yeah, I would encourage everyone to go to their website and see how you can support their work, because they're really a national leader in this issue.
Great. We've got another question here. That for a small household, what's the best way to compost coffee grounds and vegetable scraps?
Yeah, that's a great question. The solid waste districts and towns that are around the state, you can find your solid waste district by going to 802recycles.com. That's www.802recycles.com, and you'll be able to find your solid waste district. Many of them have discounted compost bins for sale. The one that is most common is the black plastic soil saver, which we recommend installing with a hardware cloth wire mesh underneath. There's directions on our website on how to do that. And composting coffee grounds and vegetable scraps is probably the easiest place to start. If you have a lawn or some leaves, what I recommend to folks is that they save up several bags of leaves for the winter, and that they add those leaves. So basically around Halloween, you make sure you've saved up some bags of leaves for winter composting, and you make sure to add those at minimum in the spring, right around April Fool's Day. You add in those leaves you've saved in your garage or your shed or your storage area. And that provides enough carbon mixed with nitrogen. Food waste, especially coffee grounds, are pretty high in nitrogen, and you need carbon that is in all living things but dry leaves, dry plants, sawdust, wood chips, shredded paper like newspaper can be used to mix in with your carbon and nitrogen. You want about 4 parts browns or carbon to 1 part food waste. 3 to 1 is an easy recipe.
Great, thank you guys. Another question here, will residents need to purchase new curbside pickup bins for compostable waste for the July 2020, I presume they're talking about the recycling deadline. And then will curbside pickup be provided as part of CSWD? I believe that's Chittenden Solid Waste District is the acronym there. So will curbside pickup be provided as part of the CSWD routes come summer of 2020?
The answer to that is no, and Robin can speak more to that, but CSWD doesn't pick up trash or recycling. They're really they have facilities that they have a compost facility and a material recovery facility that sorts recycling. But the majority of the collection of trash, recyclables, and food scraps is done by private haulers across the state for the most part. And there is a requirement currently in state law that haulers of trash must offer collection of food scraps to their customers on July 1st, 2020. The legislature is still discussing that. They are still in session. And we don't know if any bills will be passed to change that. There was a bill proposed that accepted ANR's recommendations on the food scrap hauling requirement. Basically, that would only require it of haulers that to serve their customers of 4 units or more, like a condominium or an apartment building that had 4 units or more, and to commercial customers. This has been, the hauling of food waste has been discussed for several years, and it's been, the haulers of solid waste, of trash, have really advocated to not be forced to offer that collection. They really don't want to have to do it. That being said, there are almost 20 food scrap haulers currently in the state of Vermont. So there are many service providers looking to try and offer this. And I would encourage residents to ask their hauler if they provide that service. It will come at a cost, as many things do, but typically if a hauler does provide it, they provide the collection containers for it. You can find a list at vtrecycles.com of the food scrap haulers in the state. That's www.vtrecycles.com. That's our solid waste homepage.
And just a note for everybody attending the webinar, I'll make sure to work with our presenters to compile some of the key resources and make sure that those are emailed out to everyone who's attended. So no need to frantically jot down notes if you're not already. We have a related question related to curbside pickup, which is someone asking, what can I tell people who have curbside pickup and will now have to pay extra or drive to a drop-off site? I love composting and I'm a master composter, but not everyone else does. And I need a really good incentive for those who don't want to compost.
It's an excellent point, and it's one that I personally struggle with too. When you have convenient services for trash, it's just so hard to make the case to convince somebody to take the extra step to separate their food waste. As we've all had experiences with recycling over the decades, it has taken decades to make this into a habit that Vermonters now just do. There is demand for recycling in the state. We are hopeful that that same demand will grow for composting, but it takes time. I would encourage anyone who has a trash hauler to ask them if they offer food scrap collection, because haulers respond to the market. They actually respond very quickly to the market when it demands a service. We saw that with recycling, and I think over time, we are seeing that with hauling. Since the universal recycling law passed in 2012, the number of haulers that offer food scrap collection has nearly doubled. This is an evolution. It takes time and it comes at some cost. Haulers have told me they're concerned about whether people are willing to pay for this service. A recent study done by UVM showed that there are people willing to pay. I think it was somewhere almost as much as 37%, maybe 40% were willing to pay as much as $10 a month. There is a service provided in Chittenden County right now, curbside service, no waste compost, that ranges, I believe, from about $10 to $15 a month, depending on how frequently you get service. The map that Ann showed showed a few of the towns that have residential curbside collection, and we can send links to that info. It's growing, and again, I would encourage people to ask their hauler about that service and to look for service providers.
Another option for growing is there more community compost sites across the state, and that's another option for people who don't want to compost at home, but there might be one in their neighborhood, or as a master composter, we would encourage folks to try to set those up in their communities so people don't have to drive as far, maybe to the local transfer station to bring their food scraps.
And if I could just jump in, the biggest benefit that I find with people is no more smelly trash. You know, you're not throwing away anything different, but by keeping your food scraps separate, now you don't need to have your trash picked up so often because it doesn't smell. So if right now you have curbside pickup for trash, maybe they come once a week, you might be able to drop to twice a month or even once a month. I mean, I know it takes me forever to fill up a trash can because, you know, if all my food scraps are going into compost and I'm recycling as much as I possibly can and not getting waste as much as I possibly can, it really takes a long time for me to develop enough trash to be worth paying somebody to, and I don't because I live in a condo, but you know, if I were a resident paying a hauler like I used to, I probably would have stopped by now and just started taking it myself to a drop-off center once a month because there's just no reason I need to empty anything before that.
We've got a note here from our friends in Williston, noting that it's the Sustainable Williston group that has the Cutlery Loan Program, and just a few weeks ago, convinced the town to be responsible for recycling and composting bins at town events, noting that this is still a process that, like many things in the world, has to be tested and refined. So thank you, Williston, for chiming in there. Well, we've got time for maybe one or two more questions here. One is, will public areas such as Church Street in Burlington start offering composting bins to the public after July 2020?
It's not, I think I heard that question. It's not state law that a business or an organization has to offer the bins. It is state law that after July 1, 2020, technically all food waste would be banned from disposal in trash and in landfills. And state statute says with all of our disposal bans, no person shall knowingly dispose of these materials. We get this question a lot. And the difficulty is that statute puts the responsibility on the person holding that piece of material they need to do something with. So makes it difficult for us where state law was clear that in public spaces, recycling bins needed to be co-located with trash bins. So and public spaces in state law were defined as state buildings, and town parks, state parks, state office buildings, that type of places. Beyond that, we don't have the law to require these bins. Some municipalities and solid waste districts have passed ordinances that go beyond state law. And maybe Robin can speak to some that Chittenden Solid Waste District has.
Sure, yeah, in Chittenden County, our ordinance extends that requirement to have paired recycling and trash bins to any property where the containers are being made available for public use. So you're not obligated to provide a trash can in your business for customers to use, but if you do, you have to have a recycling bin with it. And that's been the law here for a couple, maybe going on 3 years now. Not made any change to our ordinance and don't anticipate making a change that would require adding compost bins to those public settings. Where we're likely to expect them is going to be in temporary settings like large events. So Burlington hosts a lot of concerts and festivals. We aren't going to expect Waterfront Park to have compost containers available all the time, but when they're hosting an event with 5,000 people and there are, 10 different food trucks there selling food, there's a reasonable expectation that a substantial amount of food waste is going to be generated there. And so it's incumbent on whoever's responsible for the waste, whether it's the venue or the event organizer, to make sure that they have a plan for keeping those food scraps that they're generating out of the landfill. So at this point, we're not anticipating a, sort of permanent placement in public settings, but we do expect people who are generating, substantial amounts, not just the one banana peel from somebody walking down the street, but, a whole bunch of corn husks from, the roasted corn booth. Those are going to need to be taken care of.
And Ian, if I can just add, this is Josh again. State law has essentially provided us with a North Star to follow. The future of waste management in Vermont is a 3-bin system. We're going to have some trash. We know that there are still things we can't recycle or compost or do without. There is recycling is become available pretty much statewide. And the next thing is food scraps and organic materials. And it's imperfect. The law doesn't require it in every single situation, but it gives us the guidance that I guess provides some areas of opportunity where volunteers like VECAN and people who are motivated can ask. And just by asking the question, do you have composting available here? It would be great if you could. It gets the conversation started, and then people start engaging in their communities and figuring out ways to do this that are effective. There are so many small barriers, such as the ick factor, the smell, and concerns that are completely addressable, as so many people have done. I'm just so empowered by the stories Robin has shared and all of you who are willing to lean in this work to help the state meet its goals. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Reach out to your solid waste districts and towns for help and assistance in this work.
I can't think of a better note to end on. Thank you so much, Josh, Ann, and Robin, for sharing your time and expertise with us. And thank you all for joining this webinar today. We'll make sure that you're emailed a recording of today's presentation, as well as a compilation of some of the key resources that came up. Stay tuned to your emails for future webinar offerings. And thank you all again so much for joining us and for all the work that you do in your communities.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody.